and welcome everyone. And because we're in Romania, at least with our hearts, I would like to also say Bună ziua. Welcome to the Geoscience Geoint panel. I'm Dr. Camelia Kantor, VP of Academic Affairs and Professional Development at the United States Geospatial Intelligence Foundation, and the organizer and moderator for this panel. It is a true pleasure to participate in the Geoscience 2020. So thank you, Dr. DeLuca and team for inviting us. Also, many thanks to the Romanian Society of Applied Geophysics and their interest in bringing this subject to the public. Given the focus on geosciences at this event, you may have wondered about the Geoint part in our panel title. Or at least we hope that you did, because we're going to spend the next hour or so discussing Geoint, a field that is less known outside of the United States-based academia and a few military academies around the world. One that has close ties with the field of geosciences and is witnessing very rapid growth. While the abbreviation of Geoint is specific to the United States, you might have also encountered the term of geointelligence or geointel, more commonly used in Europe. I'm a geographer by education and training, having tried and completed several degrees in search for one that would bring it all together. I found Geoint before the community found me, by reading about it online, then trying my chances with the National Science Foundation application to build an interdisciplinary geoscience and Geoint curricula at my then university. I was not successful the first time and reapplied the following year after building a stronger alliance with another geographer, Dr. Pricope, also in the panel today, and Dr. Knapp, a geoscientist at the University of South Carolina, currently University of Oklahoma. We received the award, which demonstrates again the power of partnerships and collaboration. To my knowledge, that was the first time the National Science Foundation provided an award for the field of Geoint. It all escalated from there with me leaving academia for a broader mission to steward and grow the field of Geoint through collaboration, education, research, and professional development. This is how I met and became friends with most of today's panelists, coming today together to serve as global ambassadors for a young but rapidly growing discipline, with significant potential benefits to another highly interdisciplinary field of the geosciences. But what exactly is Geoint?
Who, what, why, when, where? These questions form the foundation of human exploration. They are fundamental to knowing and understanding our world. Their answers are essential to information gathering, storytelling, and problem solving. They have inspired the world's most famous thinkers and pioneers to push past the accepted, the conventional, the ordinary, to reveal truly extraordinary discoveries that have shaped our lives and stirred our imaginations. And they are at the heart of America's security. At the National Geospatial Intelligence Agency, the answers to these questions form the foundation of our mission. Everything on Earth, from its watery depths to its highest peaks, can be measured in space and time, what's known as geospatial intelligence, or Geoint. Our workforce brings the intelligence to that equation, using our capabilities to illuminate options, inform decisions, and act with precision. NGA is a unique combination of intelligence agency and combat support agency. Our work shows the way in the air, the sea, on the front lines of a disaster, from the halls of the Pentagon to the Oval Office. We work side by side with our military services, our nation's leaders, and first responders to provide the information they need when they need it most, allowing them to take action before events become a crisis. Our country's defining moments are times of great determination and exceptional achievement, from the Revolutionary War to the expeditions of Lewis and Clark to landing a man on the moon. In each, you will find geospatial intelligence. NGA and its predecessors have been a part of some of the nation's biggest technological feats and proudest moments. And we've also answered the call during some of its darkest. Who, what, why, when, where. Throughout human history, we've yearned to discover what lies beyond the horizon. The drive to explore our surroundings and understand the Earth is deeply ingrained in our DNA. At NGA, our mission is to answer those fundamental questions today so we can help show the way to a better tomorrow. Our work is foundational, it is advancing, and it is far from finished. We will continue to explore the Earth and also the partnerships, tools, and technologies needed to meet America's geospatial demands. We must and will rise to meet all challenges, exploring where we've been and where we're going, wherever it takes us.
Many thanks to the National Geospatial Intelligence Agency for making this video available for public release. I'm sure that many in our audience could already identify elements where geosciences and Geoint intersect. We're going to try to build on that during our conversation today and to hopefully entice you to think of your own examples as we will be discussing different areas where the two intersect. So again, you've seen what Geoint is. I'll start with a very brief overview of geospatial intelligence to then invite our panelists to discuss Geoint foundations, education, training, emerging technologies, to include open source, WebGIS, and UAS, and they're used to address human vulnerabilities to natural hazards. There's several definitions of geospatial intelligence, one of them also defined by US law. However, we have here one that has been developed in 2016 by Murdoch and Clark. And bottom line, what we think really encompasses everything is that Geoint involves scientific knowledge that enables geographic technologies, which are applied using a specific tradecraft. I represent the United States Geospatial Intelligence Foundation, not NGA. So I would like to clarify that because many confuse the two. We're a nonprofit educational foundation founded in 2003 and working to promote the geospatial intelligence tradecraft and to develop a stronger community of interest between government, industry, academia, professional organizations, and individuals who share a mission focused around the development and application of geospatial intelligence to address national security issues. The geospatial intelligence essential body of knowledge, which we developed, was created by conducting a cross-industry job analysis with the help from the Geoint community. The goal of that analysis was to identify knowledge, skills, and abilities critical to the Geoint workforce. And that was put together by qualified subject matter experts from across government, industry, and academia. We're also the accrediting body for higher education accreditation of certificates and degrees in geospatial intelligence and providers of professional certifications in geospatial intelligence. For geospatial intelligence, when we try to narrow down to the main topics that categorize the 4 competencies of Geoint, we have the EBK to help with that. So we have geographic information systems and analysis tools, remote sensing and imagery analysis, geospatial data management, and data visualization. And because geospatial intelligence is both an art and a science, we also have cross-functional knowledge areas such as critical thinking, reporting, synthesis, and collaboration. These are considered to be the most critical knowledge areas needed to accomplish Geoint missions. However, geospatial intelligence is a highly multi- and cross-disciplinary field where geographers, political scientists, computer scientists, engineers, geoscientists, and many other fields collaborate to provide holistic solutions for problem solving. Today's panelists come from various walks of life. So without further ado, let's bring them in. We'll start in alphabetical order with Dr. Bradley Battista, the Director of Science and Technology at Battlespace, owner of EnerGeo Solutions, and co-chair of the USGF Tradecraft and Professional Development Committee. He's a marine scientist, geophysicist, and computational geoscientist, now also a geointer. Dr. Battista specializes in advancing geotechnology through cross-industry innovation, a strong advocate for commercial geoint as a valuable intersection of geotechnologies. Hi, Bradley.
Hi, everyone. It's a pleasure to be here today. Thanks for having me.
Thank you. Next in alphabetical order, Dr. Bruce Molina, the Senior Science Advisor for National Civil Applications for the U.S. Geological Survey, National Civil Applications Center. During more than 5 decades of exploration, research, community service, communication, public policy, and education, Dr. Molina led and participated in more than 40 polar and subpolar expeditions. His work focusing on understanding the response of glaciers to changing climate and the dynamics of tidewater glaciers. Hello, and welcome to our...
Hello, thank you very much. Hello, everybody.
Next, Dr. Cameron Carson is the Program Director for the Homeland Security and Emergency Management undergraduate and graduate programs, as well as Director of the Center for Arctic Security and Resilience at the University of Alaska Fairbanks. He's focused on redefining homeland defense, security, and emergency management education through collaborative working relationships that integrate interdisciplinary research and academic activities with the U.S. and abroad. Hello, Dr. Carlson.
Good morning, Camelia. It's great to be here with you all today.
Thank you. And next, Dr. Narcisa Pricope, one of my close collaborators. She's an associate professor of applied geography in the Department of Earth and Ocean Sciences at the University of North Carolina, Wilmington. She's also the program director at the University of North Carolina, Wilmington's USGF accredited Geospatial Intelligence Certificate, and the director of the Social Environmental Analysis Lab at UNC Wilmington. While at UNC Wilmington, Dr. Pricope was the first advocate for the inception of a drone program aimed at training students for the industry by utilizing it on various research applications. She was also the first FAA certified Part 107 small UAS PIC at UNC Wilmington, offer one of the first graduate courses in aerial drone applications in geosciences, and has garnered over $500,000 in research funding that leverages the power of UAS and drone technology for a wide variety of applications. And we're both Babbage Boyd alumni with geography degrees. I'm very proud of her work and have been collaborating very well on various projects. Hi, Narcisa.
Hi, thank you for having me.
Thank you. And last but not least, in alphabetical order only, Dr. Peter Webley is the Associate Director of Research for the Alaska Center for Unmanned Aircraft System Integration and the Research Associate Professor of Remote Sensing, Geophysical Institute, University of Alaska Fairbanks. Dr. Webley has a PhD in remote sensing and more than 15 years of experience as a geoscience and remote sensing scientist and researcher. He worked on the development of operational and real-time applications of geospatial data for hazard detection and decision-making. He's also the Deputy Director of UFS Technology Transfer Office, OIPC, and has a passion for business development and technology transfer from an academic environment into the private sector, as well as providing tools and products for hazard assessment and risk mitigation from geospatial data and observations. Hello. And
hello, Camelia. Thank you very much. Hello, panel, and great to be part of a great group. So good morning from Alaska.
Thank you all. And we've heard you have some snow there, right?
That's correct. Not as significant, but the start of winter for sure.
Well, thank you. Thank you all for being here today with us. As you can all see, we have assembled an expert panel of geointers with background in geosciences, or maybe geoscientists with background in geoint. I'm going to leave it up to them to explain how they see themselves and their work at the crossing of the two disciplines. As mentioned before, the geoint discipline is growing at an accelerated pace, and there's so much energy and potential behind it that it requires a more global approach to creating an ecosystem where expertise from different disciplines and areas of the world converge and allow for cross-collaboration and partnerships. We're here today to help implement this vision, so let's get started on our panel discussion. We'll try to cover topics, as we said, such as joint foundations, education, training, emerging technologies, and vulnerabilities to natural hazards. Let's begin by discussing joint foundations. So Dr. Molina, I think I'm going to start with you. I already went over your short bio, so can you just tell us in just a few words, who are you? And are you a geointer or a geoscientist?
Thank you, Dr. Kantor. First and foremost, I'm a geologist, a geoscientist. In a career that spanned more than 55 years, I've integrated many newly emerging geoint technologies into my geoscience toolkit as they become available. Each has provided me a new option to use to facilitate my geoscience investigations. My career began in 1965 with the use of marine seismic profiling, collection, and interpretation. I quickly expanded to include the use of aerial photography for terrestrial studies and the ocean-land interface. With the first public availability of satellite remote sensing in the early 1970s, I added Landsat to my toolbox to provide regional assessments and change detection. By 1975, the availability of GIS allowed me, for the first time, to expand from image interpretation to Geoint. In the 1980s, I added side-looking airborne radar and then space-based SAR. Today, I combine satellite imagery from multiple sources, historical and modern ground-based photography, GIS, and metadata to understand the dynamics of glacier landscapes, their change on decadal and century timescales. And as the images you're putting up show, the first one was a ground-based photograph of a historic photograph from the 1890s that I duplicated here in this image on the left-hand side are three views of the same location in Glacier Bay, showing the changes in a period of only 63 years, the loss of almost 1,000 meters of ice and the retreat of a glacier amounting to almost 9 kilometers, will be metric here. And the aerial photograph to the right shows the changes from the position in the 1941 time framework, 1976 and 2004, which corresponds on the photo. The next image shows the same area from space. And here you're looking at 46 years of change using Landsat just to show in this case, a variety of different color combinations, the changes that have occurred here. So thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Molina, very much. And actually, I'll go back. I think we have a question from the audience. What are some intelligence and easy to access solutions to the integration of varied measurement data with real-time monitoring of hazards? I think you would be the appropriate person to answer that, but again, we all welcome everyone else to intervene if needed. Something that would allow area-specific data querying of geological, geophysical, and satellite data, and direct export of maps data similar to the Earth Explorer and digital elevation models.
That's a really interesting question, and it's quite complex. A little bit later, I'm going to talk about two data sets that are available from Earth Explorer that allow a Geoint person to have access to nearly 65 years of imagery that you can use to look at change, especially in actively changing places like coastlines, areas of natural hazards, retreating glaciers. And all of this can be used to produce shapefiles that can go into a geospatial environment. So I think virtually anything that you can quantify from imagery can be used to give you a Geoint and a geospatial connection. Let me stop there and see what others have to say.
I'd like to just mention that Romania is participating in the European Plate Observing System research infrastructure, and they're now facing transition from the implementation to the operational phase, trying to build something like this. So I think the audience is trying to understand if there's already something built.
I don't know of a single complete publicly available package, but there are many, many applications in different both open source and commercial GIS programs that allow you to pull together diverse types of information.
Maybe that's the reason. build
I'm
it
sorry.
in.
They say you'd have to figure out what your needs were and then start looking at what's available. You'll probably find something that you can use.
Mhm. Well, moving forward, I would like to also ask what type of standardization there is like, is there any element that provides some basis for understanding Geoint that people could learn or read about?
So in terms of foundational Geoint, NGA defines it as the creation of always accurate, high resolution, continually updated representations of the Earth's properties available on demand. And they put out this publication that you see here on the screen, Geospatial Intelligence, parentheses, Geoint Basic Doctrine. To me, this is probably the best document, although I wish they would update it to 2021, in terms of defining the basic parameters and how Geoint can be used in a broad variety of communities. Their focus is on national defense, but a lot of what's in here goes a lot further than that. And they talk about advanced phenomenologies and analytical technologies. And the way they define it, advanced phenomenologies involves the use of novel methods and efficient strategies to deliver spatial, spectrally, and temporally resolve data from a growing number of traditional and non-traditional sources. And analytical technologies involves the ability to leverage new data sources and new analytical technologies to add geospatial intelligence to multi-intelligence analytics in an effort to address emerging threats in mission domains. So this has sort of a national security spin to it, but a lot of what is used to get there could be used in academia and research.
Mm-hmm. Thank you, Dr. Molina. Well, now I would like to turn to our industry representative here, Dr. Battista. You represent the industry on this panel. We've had a lot of personal discussions related to the symbiotic relationship between Geoint and Geosciences. You come from the Geosciences background yourself, kind of landed into Geoint. Please let the audience know about your background and try to summarize what are some of the few main areas where these two converge, and maybe how would the industry benefit from a better collaboration between the two communities?
Thank you, Camelia. This is an excellent topic, and I'm going to combine my introduction with my response because so many Geointers have a similar story to mine. So I did not set out to, I didn't start out to be a Geointer at the start of my career. I'd never heard of it. It happened as a result of many factors. You mentioned Dr. Camelia Knapp earlier. She was actually the first person to point it out to me after I had actually finished my doctoral degree in geophysics. So that's just an interesting trend that I think we see happening more and more with people that are already out of school. So I started my career in marine science. I had a bachelor's and a master's degree in marine science, but I found myself learning to code aboard research vessels in the middle of the ocean. Programming became my escape from the confined, disconnected, and routine life of a seafaring oceanographer. I really started programming and playing with the data on the boat when I was off duty because I was bored. But by playing with the data, I discovered for myself a whole new world of applied mathematics. I learned that even the ugliest math could be broken down into simple instructions for a computer to follow. So coding algorithms became a passion, and the more I did it, the less I became a marine scientist and the more I became a geophysicist. So I went back to school to formalize that transition. So let's note first that developing skills, programming in this case, being independent of both marine science and geophysics, catalyzed my transition from one to the other. I started working with Linux early in my transition as well, because it gave me free access to programming tools. But early Linux was definitely not for a newcomer. It required a lot of skills that I didn't have. But there were lots of internet forums, and there were several books being written. So fueled by curiosity, I went down another rabbit hole, unwittingly developing skills that would later contribute to me becoming a Geointer. Becoming proficient with freely available Linux created skills for data science and server management, among others. So let's note this too, that access to free resources and help from a community of like-minded innovators this also facilitates the development of valuable but undocumented skills. So let's call these shadow skills, because they just sort of happen in the shadows of life. Shadow skills hold every bit as much professional development value. So take a moment to reflect on your own experiences. What shadow skills might you already have? And it's not the fault of academia that I missed the early boat on Geoint. This is a very new field even for academia. However, the core academic curriculum between marine science and geophysics at the time I went through it was basically the same. There was physics, bio, geo, chemical, and today there's even a digital core that's frequently showing up. The shadow skills that I picked up allowed me to reinvent myself on top of the academic geoscience core. Without the academic foundation, I would not be where I am today. So pulling everything together to address the areas where geosciences and Geoint converge, here it is. A strong academic foundation, supplemented with technical skills, often shadow skills, and an association with an open, innovative community. These are the areas where geosciences and Geoint converge. There's a very broad list of technological overlap as well, but it gets very confusing to talk about it on that level, and that's what we'll do here today. So now let's address how industry would benefit from better collaboration between geosciences and Geoint. Let me start by emphasizing that career transitions and professional developments typically happen at the same time, and that's often on your time. Many employers discourage the development of skills that do not directly serve their interests. And this is unfortunate because it means professional development competes with either personal life or productivity. This forces an antiquated learning model in which we must first acquire skills before we can apply ourselves, when in reality, we acquire skills by applying ourselves, like learning to speak or to dance, for example. It also allows us to age out, older professionals potentially falling out of touch because they no longer have time for education. So technology playgrounds, or digital sandboxes as they're often called, are places where old skills are tuned and new skills are formed. And there's so much to gain in geosciences and beyond by reforming our classrooms and our workplaces to share these digital spaces. Building on the concepts of GitHub or the Jupyter Notebook and many others, we need to grow these types of platforms for broader exposure. The solutions to geospatial challenges are often scattered across industries, and we must allow for some level of play to find them. We must play together, old and young, credentialed and not, and across industries to truly identify and assemble the pieces of our future. But if nothing else, we need to collaborate on how to better recognize and credential the skills that many people may have already developed on their own. This goes beyond geosciences, but everything about a person makes them a better geoscientist or a better geointer. This is definitely something to explore together. I'm very grateful that the USGIF certified Geoint professional credentials were created, because even though I'm far into my career, early career credentials are still relevant because they allow me to legitimately call myself a geointer. I can pull those shadow skills into the light. So I quickly aligned myself with the USGIF Tradecraft and Professional Development Committee, not because I was interested in becoming a geointer, but because I realized I already was one. And I want to see this community grow by finding and sharing stories just like mine and helping upcoming professionals get quicker access to it so that their career path can be exactly what they want, in foresight, not in hindsight. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Battista. This is awesome. The next panelist today, Dr. Pricope, talking about cross-collaboration, education, training in Geoint. We have a difficult role to keep up with the rapid changes in industry and meet the government needs for a technological savvy and critical thinking, well-rounded professional workforce. And Dr. Battista already alluded to several of the things that we're doing in the Geoint community. Dr. Pricope is the director, as I said, of the UNC Wilmington Geoint program. And she went through the accreditation process of her program not long time ago. She's also actively engaged in a lot of ongoing efforts and discussions regarding market-needed competencies. So Dr. Pricope, Please briefly introduce yourself and tell us a little bit about your transition into Geoint and the most recent updates to your program and the things on the horizon.
Thank you, Camelia. Yes, so as you pointed out in the beginning, I am a Romanian trained geographer. I was broadly trained as a geoscientist specializing in geomorphology out of Babeș-Bolyai in Cluj. And I came to the United States to pursue a master's degree. And upon being exposed in geomorphology, so a very geoscience heavy branch of geography, and upon starting to ask questions that relied on geomorphological and physical geography types of techniques, I realized that I needed to know more. So I stumbled upon GIS. And then I realized that I needed to integrate remote sensing satellite data to answer the questions that I was seeking to answer as I progressed through my PhD. So I then I got a lot of skills on remote sensing. So as such, I started off with a very geoscience heavy background and a geoscience heavy focus, and then I added all of these geospatial skills, becoming basically a geospatial scientist. And then I met Dr. Kantor, who, as she mentioned earlier today, exposed me to the field of Geoint, and that's when I actually realized that we can do a benefit to ourselves, to our careers, as well as our students by essentially exposing them to something broader than just physical geography or geoscience or GIS or remote sensing alone. So I became very enthusiastic about the field of Geoint and about being able to have a framework, an integrative synthetical framework that would allow students to be trained essentially as a well-rounded geospatial geoscientist, geo whatever, with those very, very strong pillars, being GIS, data management, remote sensing, imagery analysis, visualization, and just generally the ability to combine these and synthesize and apply them to a question. So if you wanted to go to my next slide, in my research, therefore, in the training that I do, and as the director of such a Geoint program, a relatively new Geoint program at a university here in the United States, I basically have the pleasure of just seeing folks excited when things click, when they realize that they can come to a Geoint program with a background in biology, marine science, geology, geoscience, and essentially find some tools and some skill sets that they can use and apply to further their discipline and to further their careers and allow them to ask bigger and more complex questions. So what's on the horizon for us as we transition these programs and as we do research on climate change or research on population vulnerability, degradation, is oftentimes has been the integration of these sciences, of the geospatial sciences with the remote sensing sciences, and lately UAV and UAS, so unmanned aerial systems, sciences. So that's kind of on the horizon, and I'm very, very interested in asking and being able empowering students and future geoscientists to ask these complex applied questions that essentially, in the end, come down to human well-being and resilience of ecosystems and resilience of communities in the face of natural disasters or socio-environmental changes or degradation. And I work a lot with economists and geoscientists and social scientists and biologists in all sorts of settings and all sorts of applications. And I'm also very interested, and I carry that interest over into the kinds of education that we do through our Geoint program in the development of algorithms and data integrations that allow us to then to refine these models of global change or degradation through the use of these novel emergent technologies around UAS and satellite-based remote sensing and so on. And one such example, and a lot of what I focus on and what I've been empowered to do by sort of becoming the Geointer, so to speak, is to leverage the disciplines and leverage the backgrounds, and actually leverage a lot of different collaborators and players into being able to ask questions such as this one that I have up here, looking at finding gray infrastructure and green infrastructure options, working with engineers to think about how we can build more flood resilience, transportation networks, for example, and so on and so forth. And in doing so, if you would progress to the next slide, we are then able to bring to the table all of these sciences and all of these pieces to essentially create models that integrate between social and physical, social sciences, geophysical sciences, and look at such vulnerabilities. And we'll stop here for now.
Thank you, Dr. Pricope. And moving from Wilmington, North Carolina to Fairbanks, Alaska, both Dr. Webley and Dr. Carlson lead programs at University of Alaska. Dr. Webley, will you please introduce yourself, same as the others, your program, and talk a little bit about some examples of integrating real-world challenges into higher education for workforce development with industry learning environments?
Thank you, Camelia. Hi, everybody. Yeah, so I'm Peter Webley. It's interesting listening to everybody's stories and their careers of how they've come into the geoscience or the geointel field. So my background is in geophysics and remote sensing analysis for natural hazards. And as more remote sensing data has come available over the years, and Bruce gave some great summaries of some time series of work early from the glaciers in Alaska, it really shows that as more and more data is available from spaceborne imagery, from airborne imagery, and even from ground-based sensors, there's a need for geointel to be able to analyze that data to get better products for decision-making. So I'm part of the Unmanned Aircraft Systems Integration Program, a quasi, here at the University of Alaska Fairbanks. We are the University of Alaska's unmanned system. We have a 3-university as part of the University of Alaska here in the state, with UAF, where myself and Dr. Carlson are based, is one of those, with Anchorage and University of Southeast in Juneau. So we, as a quasi, represent the University of Alaska's program. We're also a key partner of the Federal Aviation Administration's Center of Excellence in the United States, that's based out of Mississippi State University. As it says at the top of the slide here, we lead the test site, the Alaska US test site, one of 7 around the country. But you also see the team. Is it not just geoscientists or geointel experts? There's a full plethora of personnel that make up the team here. We have pilots that can fly both a small, so in the US, they're classified as small unmanned aircraft systems, and you can see one in the top right image of those 4 there. It's about the size of a large Pelican case. Everything, and that would do a vertical takeoff and landing, all the way to a large unmanned aircraft systems, and you see that in the single image in the middle. That's the Griffin Sea Hunter aircraft, and that's a runway specific aircraft that takes about 8 hours of flight time. More the smaller ones, you're looking at less than an hour of flight time. And then we have experts in flight operations, engineers, because you need to be able to fix the aircraft in hand, research scientists, people like myself, education and training, both for our team and for the students coming through our program, and obviously to keep the wheels turning, the administration. And it's working all of these different aspects together when you build a program. And we've heard others that run programs where it's not just the geoscientist or the geointel person that comes in. So on to the next slide. In terms of your question on the sort of workforce development, we're looking at new ways to modernize the student experience, which is, rather than have a group of engineers, let's say, in a class working on something, we try and bring together across the university academic system. So it might be a team with engineers, geoscientists, experts, those with the computer science background. Dr. Battista was talking about his Linux and his programming. We can bring in a computer scientist working with an engineer or a geoscience geointel and put them together and say, okay, here's a need and challenge of the industry. What's a solution that you could look to work on together? So you're bringing different mindsets to the problem from the beginning, rather than having, let's say, a team of geoscientists just working together, a team of computer scientists, or a team of engineers, especially on the unmanned aircraft systems approach where you need all different aspects of that for it to work. So on the right-hand slide here, this is actually in an engineering class where they're actually learning how to build an unmanned aircraft systems, but they're doing it with a mission-driven need. So it would be, how do we map the receding glaciers in Alaska when we have to fly from a boat, we can't fly from land, we have to ensure visual line of sight, and the industry representative, let's take Dr. Battista as the user of the data, they need a derived map product of the glacier edge once you land. So how do you develop that complete workflow from type of aircraft, flight availability, data processing, and product generation, and therefore the students basically plan that type of mission from all different aspects, the engineering, the geointel, the geoscience, the decision-making tools. So it's working together and modernizing the student experience so they can become the next generation of employees that go on to work in federal organizations like Bruce represents with the USGS, or in the United States, or Dr. Battista representing the private industry. And therefore they're more informed students going out into the world beyond the academic environment. So that's it from me.
Thank you, Dr. Webley. Thank you very much. And moving on to Dr. Carlson, still staying in Alaska. Your program is not what we would call as the typical Geoint. It falls under the School of Management and focuses on Homeland Security and emergency management. But as we know, Geoint is largely used to support disaster response programs. Will you also introduce yourself and talk a little bit about your programs and how extensive is the use of Geoint for your students or those groups you work with?
Certainly, thank you again. And if a rising tide actually, increases the lift for all boats, I'm very fortunate to be with you all today. Peter Webley, Dr. Webley, that's with us here as well, I should note, is a deputy director for the Center for Arctic Security and Resilience, where we're at. And he does a lot of work with the Homeland Security and Emergency Management Program. I am, to be very candid, I'm not a geoscientist. I don't have a geo background. What I do and have done for about the past 10 years is run a program of practitioners and operators through education that then gets them out to the field to be the terminal end user. We like to think of products such as Geoint, GIS, remote sensing, and taking a step back from that and in going into this presentation, some research that we did back in 2016, it looked at 87 educational themes that should basically build out to serve as the basis for a baccalaureate degree. And as part of that, we sent it out and we had 1,000 practitioners in either the emergency management, Homeland Security, or Homeland Defense arena come back and basically through a process called MaxDiff, look at and basically sequence what the most to least important areas that should be included in the program. And surprisingly enough, GIS came out 83 of 87 that was on there. And I think it's somewhat telling because, again, I think if there were wider use and application of it in the field, especially the fields that I basically provide for right now, that it would have most certainly had come up higher. I should say that it was much higher with the academics that were there and surveyed in a separate but very similar circumstance. They looked at it and they were about halfway through. So it was approximately 40 within the 87 different topics that were covered from that. Our undergraduate and graduate programs, like I said, basically focus on those that are going out into the field and are working as practitioners. Some of them are wildland firefighters, for instance, that find themselves, yes, here in Alaska where they're employed, but then going out periodically to fight forest fires that could be in California, they could be in Idaho, they could be in other locations. They go through the firefighting process, for instance, and what happens is that they end up basically becoming leaders and managers, those individuals that I think we on this panel are looking to better integrate what we see out there. In another different survey that we conducted, we went through and took a look at the curriculums that we were able to find from either the FEMA Higher Education website, where a lot of our different programs are showcased, or the University and Agency Partnership Program through the Department of Homeland Security at the Naval Postgraduate School. And what we found in going through their curriculum, and it was an informal review of their curriculum, is that less than 5% of the programs that are out there that are similar to our program actually had a formalized or codified class that looked at GIS or remote sensing or Geointel and put it into the program. And again, I think that that is, unfortunately, is somewhat telling, as it the Geointel arena is becoming so much more important these days. I mean, we have a couple of various pictures or cartoons, I like to call them, off onto the side that basically demonstrate, you know, the legitimacy of how these different products can be used in planning. They can be used in better forecasting, where response requirements will be needed over the long term. And even in application for active events that are going on today. It's just not an intel, it's an information collection process that provides them, especially the leader, the manager that's actually down on the ground, a better capability as to what they could really employ to get the information that they need to be effective in the decisions that they're making. And again, I think that that is somewhat of a critical shortfall that we're looking at these days. It's clear that the applications are in wider use. Unfortunately, they're just not finding their way into the hands of a lot of the practitioners and operators that we see physically down on the ground today, fighting forest fires, that are taking a look at disaster mitigation to prevent events from actually having a more profound effect on a community somewhere. They're not finding their hands into individuals that are actually going to have to make longer term strategic plans based upon what they see with greater applications, such as synthetic aperture radar, or some of the other tools that are oriented to, again, allow them to plan to be effective in terms of where we build in the future for community planning and providing for resilience type efforts.
So what are the recommendations? What can we do in order to bring more of these first responders and create the awareness?
I think that that's a good question. I think one of the things that we need to do is basically, especially in the academic community, programs that are similar to our program need to do a better job, if not having a separate and distinct class that puts this type of information into the hands of the operators that are going out into the field. I think that we need to integrate it deeper within the curriculum so that they understand the difference between remote sensing to a GIS application where they're looking at a map, that they understand what is out there in terms of the tools that they can apply and get other individuals interested in, and even going back to what Peter does on the side as well, and that is the difference between the different types of systems that are out there. We have a graduate student right now that is, still somewhat flummoxed over the fact that he wanted to look at an application for a graduate study that when he was going into it was like a UAV versus what an unmanned aerial system actually is, and the different varieties that are out there. Again, and this is a graduate student, you almost pause and going, at least within our academic realm, we have not done enough to advocate how important and profound the integration of this education in the program could be for what we are going to be doing in the future for either homeland defense, security, or emergency management activities.
Thank you, Dr. Carlson. We already spoke about education, a little bit about professional development. We talked about Geoint foundations. Let's now move on to the second part of our discussion, because we feel like we provided a baseline of what Geoint is. And when we initially brainstormed about what to cover in this particular panel, given the large amount of information, foci, the different backgrounds available, technology seemed to be a common thread, in particular Geoint products, data acquisition, and emerging technologies. Emerging technologies such as artificial intelligence and its subset, machine learning, cloud computing, advanced sensors, have the potential to transform and empower the users. They can help expand, automate, sharpen the collection and processing of intelligence, augment analysts' ability to craft strategic and value-added analysis and insights, and enable the user to better time, tailor, and target intelligence products for key decision makers. We also mentioned excuse me, in our panel overview, openly sourced and enterprise geospatial have emerged as enablers, where new data options such as crowdsourcing, do-it-yourself data collection from drones and other sensors, and machine learning approaches are coming to supplement traditional foundational products, especially with truly on-demand content. So back in 2006, NGA's priorities for doing research at the National Geospatial Intelligence Agency mentioned that the vision for Geoint 2 involves bringing intelligence into a single operating environment that will allow analysts to draw from a variety of sources when making interpretations. Data for a specific location on Earth's surface require both general knowledge of human and physical processes and specific knowledge of geography, culture, and tradition. Data on the physical environment may be directly measurable by sensors or come from maps, but other data will come from the other intelligence, especially from open, public information about people and their lands. So question for all, are we there yet? Is it Geoint 2 or beyond that? And what's the next on the horizon? Dr. Molina, I'll probably start with you, but anybody feel free to jump into the conversation.
Our response would be, that was 14 years ago that report came out. And there've probably been orders of magnitude of improvement in IT capabilities, speed, size, volumes of new data are coming from sensors that no one even conceived of in 2006. In fact, if you look at what's happened in commercial remote sensing just in the last few years, there now are multiple global companies providing synthetic aperture radar, providing high resolution, medium resolution, low resolution, space-based multispectral imagery. Eventually we'll get hyperspectral imagery available, but there are all sorts of other geophysical data sets that are now available. In a perfect world, you'd be able to look at all of them from a single desktop using a software package that could ingest information from all of them. In that respect, we haven't gotten there yet, but we're certainly making lots of progress.
So I'll stay with you, Dr. Molina, for the academic community, and this actually continues the conversation you just started. For the academic community and virtually anyone else without the resources to purchase expensive commercial imagery, what options are there for acquiring timely and valuable data?
Okay, well, in terms of data, there are many options. As you said, with money, you can get virtually anything. Without money, there's still lots of things that you can have access to. For instance, in terms of imagery, you've put up a slide of mine showing the homepage for Earth Explorer. Earth Explorer is a USGS entry point to more than 300 different types of geospatial data. And all of them are available either at no cost or in some cases the cost of reproduction and distribution. And these cover the globe. Included in this are Landsat, space-based declassified imagery, aerial photography, and a number of other types of data. So let's start with Landsat. And what you see up here is the sort of banner on the USGS Landsat homepage, showing the idea that Landsat can be used for change detection and monitoring global environmental processes, global change, climate change, response to fires, and so on. So Landsat is now approaching 47 years of successful operation. And it does give you a global perspective. Next slide, please.
Yeah, while you're here, could you also address the difference between, we have a question from the audience, between Sentinel-2 and Landsat-8?
Well, Landsat-8 is strictly multispectral. I didn't put the bands up, but Landsat-8 gives you, I believe it's 10 different bands. There's a thermal band. There is a cloud band for atmospherics, but the majority of the bands are multispectral bands. The panchromatic band on Landsat has a 15-meter pixel size. Most of the other bands are 30 meters. The cloud band, the aerosol band is 100 meters. So it is not a high resolution system, it's a moderate resolution system. What makes Landsat important is that you have this record that goes back to Landsat 1, launched in 1972, and a continuous record of collection somewhere in the order of nearly 10 million individual images that have been collected and archived, and most of them are publicly available from the Earth Explorer website. There are a number of foreign Landsat programs which also have imageries that you can get for a number of international locations. So Landsat is 1530, and in the time of Landsat 1, 79 meter pixels. Sentinel is a high resolution system. Sentinel is both multispectral, and there's a Sentinel SAR capability as well. And the nice thing about them is Sentinel and Landsat are both free, available at no cost. Let me talk a little bit about elevation data, because that's another important part of being able to deal in the geospatial world. And so in terms of where you could go to get free elevation data, global elevation data, there are DEMs created from Astrodata. There also is a shuttle topography mission, NASA DEM, that was released in 2015 that has been reprocessed to provide data at 30-meter spacing for all of the world between 83 north and 83 south. The AstroDEM also is a 30-meter resolution DEM. If you've got money, you can purchase from TerraSAR-X a DEM that has 12-meter spacings. So there's geospatial data. There's almost everything but synthetic aperture radar data that is going to give you the ability to do continuous interferometric studies. But that's going to change in a year to a year and a half when the NISAR satellite, the NASA Indian remote sensing satellite, which is a synthetic aperture radar satellite that I believe has P-band and S-band, and will give you continuous opportunities for looking at elevation and change detection for most of the world's surface. So let me stop there.
Thank you, Dr. Monia. We're going to move a little bit further. So we need also a comprehensive suite of tools for multiple operating systems. Where can we get such a full suite of open source tools, and if possible, really quickly? Dr. Battista, would you be able to address that?
Sure, yes, Camelia, thanks again. I have a slide for, here we go. Excuse me. Yeah, the Open Source Geospatial Foundation I found to be a really good resource. Over time, they've pulled together a comprehensive suite of tools for multiple operating systems. Now, these same tools are available from different sources at times because they're bundled differently for different operating systems. So the links I'm providing covers most systems, Windows and Linux. The tools provide a number of geospatial libraries for working with a variety of data sets, ranging from point clouds. They can handle coordinate reference system changes, vector and raster data. The libraries support higher level programs such as QGIS, GRASS, and SAGA, and all of those are actual GIS environments. And QGIS even wraps GRASS and SAGA. So you can just use QGIS if you'd like. QGIS also has a back-end plug-in system. It supports Orfeo, for example, which is a machine learning library consisting of supervised and unsupervised training algorithms and a whole lot of image processing. And the best part is that back-end is enabled through Python. And this is provided as the exchange language. So if something is lacking, you can provide it with your own skills. So I have, for example, used Python and OpenCV, which is an image and video processing library, in place of Orfeo to classify and segment images. I've also used Python and something called PDAL, which is a point data abstraction library, to classify and segment LiDAR data to produce a bare Earth digital elevation model. You can even exchange data and through Python, the entire workflow between enterprise GIS such as Esri and open source. such as these tools here. So a big thanks goes out to the original creators of these tools, many of whom were government agencies in the early days. And so these things started out as command line programs, but the open source community happily received them and has been advancing them ever since. So the image I have in the slide here, just as an example, this is a neighborhood survey. The data is LiDAR data that I pulled from the North Carolina Spatial Data Download site. Publicly, freely available LiDAR data. As Bruce was pointing out, some of this data is even available through USGS and other government sites. It's free for you to download if you have the tools to use it. So what I've done with this data set here was this area had a problem with flooding and there's a dam. So I actually did the entire catchment model by processing the data. So everything, the data and the tools, is entirely free and entirely open source. And it's extremely powerful when you take a look at what we've done. We've actually modeled the flow of water through this system. We've identified and quantified how much water comes through a dam versus other sources. And there's so much potential for that because this is what enables the do-it-yourself and the crowdsourced scientist. Thanks.
Thank you, Dr. Battista. And beyond product collection, cloud and AI tools can also help transform how intelligence is shared and deliver more broadly between analysts, organizations, and allies to distribute vital knowledge and inform decision-making. What will be that next step in having your specific user community more likely to use and share Geoint products more extensively and openly? Maybe we'll go back to you, Dr. Battista, if you could also add to that whether we should care about WebGIS and how does it work?
Yeah, thank you. We should definitely care about WebGIS. Most of these data sets, they're coming from online sources, but it's more than that. So this is an animation which may have pulled through here. These are examples I've done just to show how simple it can be. WebGIS is GIS on the web, but is it that really? We can pull it apart. A WebGIS application provides tools that a user can use to create or manipulate information. A web application does this, but it separates the tools from the interface, from the data, from all the other parts. It distributes them across a network. So they can exist across multiple computers. An interesting caveat here is that a single computer can serve content to itself, so you really don't have to change the platform if you're already working in this model. So a web application can live anywhere, and it doesn't have to be connected to the network to work. Another interesting feature of a web application is that the tools provided may be executed either on the server that's hosting it or on the client that's using it. Now, this is extremely convenient. With so much data being out in the cloud, it's nice to allow the user to carry some of the data processing on their end without tasking the server that's hosting the data. This is known as edge computing because the work is being done at the edge of the network, away from the server. And web applications still have other interesting features, like being supported wherever a web browser is supported, because that's basically the interface to the data and the tools. Finally, web standards have been optimized for streaming content. This makes web applications really nice because they're capable of real-time data processing. And that's where the GIS part comes in. GIS-enabled web applications are capable of streaming location-based data across networks while simultaneously distributing data processing across those same networks. This is very scalable. That's the term we use for this because it allows the application to scale to a very large number of users. So WebGIS is highly scalable and it's very easy to develop. So I'm not sure if we have the animation capability here with this snapshot. Oh, you do? Okay, great. So this is just an example. I'm using an Internet of Things data communication strategy. It doesn't seem like it's moving forward in it.
Yeah, it doesn't seem like it's actually playing. Yeah.
Okay, well, I'll go ahead and explain it anyway, though. So this is basically a web page. It reads in sensors. In this case, there's some marine construction equipment out in the sea, and it's digging on the seafloor. So there's a lot of equipment that needs to be guided by sensors for precise positioning. And this is happening underwater. So we use a GPS to position the vessel, and then everything is relative to that. And then we can track the equipment, in this case is a cutter head, down to the seafloor. So if we're maintaining a channel or if we're laying cables or things like that. So the data is coming in real time. It's not polling like in a conventional web page. It's directly coming in constantly. And the Internet of Things communications strategy has, in my opinion, evolved beyond that of some of the other socket and data flow resources on a normal computer, because it's designed for the network. So in this case, we would have a GPS and an angle sensor, and we might have heading as well. And we can track that down to the seafloor, and we can project this into any coordinate system. We can log data, we can do survey planning, much like you see with a lot of the drones today. A lot of the tools exist from the manufacturer in the cloud, like Pix4D, for example, allows you to design your survey. You can create your flight path lines. You can even load your data in after the fact, and it'll process and do a variety of algorithm applications there. I had another one in here as well, which we could probably skip, was a story map. Story maps are a new thing that are really powerful because they allow you to create content off the map in a web page to drive the map. So as you're going through a research article, for example, it can change the figures, zoom in, and show you what's being addressed in the text in a very interactive experience. And in the example I had, we had pulled together 4 terabytes of geophysical data, including bathymetry, backscatter, side scan sonar, magnetometer, scuba diver video footage, and so forth. All of this was integrated in the web page. And we even went beyond some of the desktop GIS features. We were able to pull in seismic reflection data, which is a vertical component, cross-sectional views. And we were able to search those much like you do the map. You could zoom in, you could pan around, you could track the mouse, so you can digitize your subsurface horizons and things like that. And the last example that I had in there was an earthquake mining tool, which would allow you to pull data from government websites, from earthquake information catalogs. All the metadata and the attributes could be used to control the colors or the sizes of the markers. You could create heat maps, for example, based on the attributes. So really it's limitless. You can go anywhere from real time to archived data, just viewing, to data processing. And I think that's, to go back to your earlier question about, are we there yet? I think the technology is probably perhaps further along than we are as people. There's just so much out there. We haven't really figured out how to optimize it yet.
Thank you, Dr. Battista. And we're going to our last part of our panel discussion. We're turning to the US community in particular. Most of you here have been using and implementing UAS. Why is it hot now, and what's coming next in the community to derive critical observations and information from unmanned geospatial data? Furthermore, what are some of the limits today on implementing them for Geoint? Dr. Webley, would you like to start?
Yes, thank you, Dr. Kantor. So if you go on to the next slide, it's going to be just a reminder of everybody of sort of the background of where I'm coming from. And we talk about the term unmanned aircraft system. We've heard unmanned aircraft vehicle, unmanned aerial vehicle, remotely piloted system, drone. There's many different terms that people use to represent the tool. And it's really, we start on the aircraft. And here's just a summary imagery of the potential spectrum and range. So in the United States, there is a classification mechanism that the Federal Aviation Administration use, small versus large. And even though I've shown a 3DR aircraft here as an example, the actual range of what's classified as a small unmanned aircraft system actually goes all the way up to 55 pounds in weight. And then beyond that, they go into the large. And we heard earlier that we have a small UAS drone certificate pilot on the panel. So they have the capability, or she has the capability to fly the small UAS. But to fly the large UAS, it's a different regulations, different pilot requirements, different operations. And then not only by size, you can do it based off the flight capabilities. So there's a lot of acronyms on this page. That's traditional from the fields that we work in. But vertical takeoff and landing, we show here a quadcopter system. Then we have the low altitude, long endurance, and then we go up to the medium altitude, long endurance, the MALE, and then the HALE, high altitude, long endurance. And this is just an example of each individual type of aircraft that fits in those. So I have here UAS, and I call it a type of aircraft. So the unmanned aircraft system is the aircraft, the ground control station, the payload, and the communications. So often people will say, oh, I'm going to fly a 3DI aircraft today. Well, that's your UAV. And then we have the UAS system. So on to the next slide. Then when we're thinking about the type of data we want, the application, we think of the sensors. And this is just an example here, mainly focusing in on the visible near infrared and long wave infrared sensors. Some of these are integrated into small UASs, and the Latitude here is a large UAS. And some of them requires engineering capabilities to attach them to a specific aircraft. So you have everything from 4K visible imagery with a uncalibrated camera to a dual long wave camera to cameras that can do 60 frames per second, 5-channel visible near infrared, all the way up to 10 channels, varying mid-wave infrared systems. So there's a full spectrum in the electromagnetic range of types of sensors that you get on these aircraft. So it's often making the decision on your application. What is your need? What is the processes that you're looking to map? And it might be that the high resolution visible provides what you need. But then if you're looking at something like, let's say, vegetation change from some hazardous event, then you might be wanting to look into the near infrared. And then obviously for things like wildland fires or volcanic eruptions or events that have a strong thermal signal, you may need something in the long wave infrared to map them. On to the next slide. Then it comes down to data collection. It's not, you're going to be producing gigabytes of data just from your flights. This is not your process data. This is not your derived product. And this is something that we think about from spaceborne imagery. Bruce had showed the Earth Explorer website. There's terabytes, if not petabytes of data on that site from the historical archives available. And if you go to other places, the commercial sites, to other federal agencies, you go into some of the sensors from UMETSAT for the geosynchronous, we start talking about terabytes of data. So here's just an example. Flying at 200 feet above ground level, you're talking about 47 gigabytes of raw images for a small field where you've collected 200 images. So start thinking about, you're flying for an hour and you're collecting twice the amount of channels. You're starting to get into the hundreds of gigabytes and beyond. And a lot of these sensors and systems don't have that storage on board. You have to include an extra solid state hard drive to connect up to the sensor. Or you have to do on-edge analyses, like Bradley was saying and Dr. Battista was saying for the WebGIS and for the satellite and Internet of Things. You're starting to have to do that just on the unmanned aircraft systems, because if you're trying to push gigabytes of data across a radio network, it's just not going to happen. So you have to wait until the flight is over before you pull the data off. So you're talking about the need to process in air, basically, so you can get a derived product down over a reliable communications network, or build a communications network, and Dr. Battista can talk about building a reliable communications system to be able to pull this type of data out of the aircraft, because otherwise you'll be waiting 2 or 3 hours to get that data into the hands of the decision maker, which can be a problem in a rapidly changing environment. On to the next slide. Then there's, what is the tool that you want to display that data? Dr. Battista showed the WebGIS. Bruce, Dr. Molina was showing the Earth Explorer as an interface to the USGS data. The National Oceanographic and Atmospheric Administration has their Emergent Environmental Response Management Application, or ERMA, and they developed an Arctic-focused tool, which is basically the ability to integrate GIS data into a web-based browser. So anybody logging in can be looking at the same data sets, and they can then have discussions from different locations on the data. But we're talking about trying to integrate this type of imagery, which has not traditionally been integrated into a web GIS for decision making. And we're doing this. The example I show here in the bottom right is from an potential ice jam location in the middle of Alaska. We don't have Wi-Fi in that location. We, at the time, only had 3G. So being able to pull gigabytes of data across a slower internet connectivity, it limits you. So we have to push select images of the river area to the decision maker, process and produce a derived product on the computer with the ground control station, and then push the derived product a few hours later to the tool for it to be viewed by the NOAA personnel in Anchorage. Being able to process in the aircraft, on the aircraft, means that you can get that shapefile GIS tool in real time pushed down to the aircraft, and then that can be shared through something like a web mapping service straight into a GIS tool. If you want to do high fidelity and high precision processing afterwards, you can, but these tools, you want to get it in the decision maker's hands straight away. Next slide. Then we have to think about operationally when we're flying these aircraft, what is the ground station? What is the system that we're using to fly the aircraft? So the top left that's the ground station for a large unmanned aircraft systems. It's not just simply a laptop or an iPad and you're controlling handsets. It's a multi-screen system that's reading in environmental condition data from the aircraft, the track of where the aircraft is, radio communications, ensuring that you're safely flying in the airspace that you're required. But because of that, in the top right, you're able to pull out, this is an image of ship traffic in the Canadian archipelago, looking at their close proximity to North Atlantic right whales in the area for safety to the whales, but also safety for the ship operations. This was an example of where the large unmanned system was able to fly hundreds of miles from the ground site with the correct permissions to capture that imagery. But then on the bottom left, this is for a small unmanned aircraft system. And here, they're actually flying on the back of a boat. And they're mapping the Aleut Glacier in the Kenai Fjords National Park. And it's just a laptop, controller systems, and an antenna, and it's just sitting on the Pelican case or the box that goes with the aircraft. So this is something that you can put in a vehicle, or small enough you could put in your backpack, and therefore that's the type of ground control station. And obviously, I mentioned earlier, getting the data into the Arctic IRMA. How can you get real-time imagery or real-time products into the hands of the decision maker that's going to be wanting to analyze the data? You want to reduce the eyes downtime. You want to reduce the time it's going to take for them to process the imagery. You want to get the important intelligence into their hands as quickly as possible. Next slide. So then there's the ability to do rapid deployment. So the bottom left is the Sea Hunter large unmanned aircraft systems. That's a runway requirement. So therefore, if you're wanting to fly this aircraft, you need a safe runway to take off and land. Has the capability, does it have enough length in the runway for that aircraft to land? If it doesn't, you can't land there. You have to choose a safe location. Then you're talking about, when you're looking at small unmanned aircraft systems, you've got the capability to land and take off from ice, because as long as you've got a safe landing spot and you're not impacting people or any infrastructure, then you're not reliant on having to have some a runway specific. You can carry the aircraft into the field and take off and land. Also taking off and landing on ships. When an aircraft takes off, it has a return to home location. Any unmanned system, it goes back to where it took off from. But how good's your anchor on your ship? So your landing spot where it was when it took off. So sometimes the movement of your launch site may impact where your aircraft can safely come back. So trying to integrate and understand that. And then just finally, before wrapping up on myself, it's and providing details for you to connect with me afterwards. Onto the next slide. It's really about a community, about coming together. So at Aquasi, and we've developed a team as part of the FAA integrated pilot program. And we also run a group of unmanned aircraft systems experts across Alaska and the US Arctic on learning from each other. I think that's something that's come out from today from the panel, is learning from different disciplines, be it the application of an unmanned system for biological research versus natural hazards research. How can lessons learned on operations and capabilities? And the same is on the Geointel. What programming capabilities could have been developed for ship tracking, like Brackley was showing, that could be applied to landscape mapping, or landslips, or coastal erosion. So programming techniques developed from one geoscience application could be applied to another, and that then is becoming, to this Geointel 2, is the lessons learned from the Geointel 1, let's say that, to the next generation, the training capability, the machine learning, AI, whatever term you would like to use. That's sort of where we're pushing to, so we can mitigate the time eyes down for processing and get data and products into the hands of those operationally making decisions as quickly as possible. So that's it from me, and I'll pass on to the next one on unmanned aircraft systems.
Thank you, Dr. Webley. Actually, I have an aircraft above me, if you hear the sound as well. I would like to move on to Dr. Pricope and her UAV work. Would you like to share some of your work?
Yes, I would be happy to. And thank you, Bradley, and thank you everybody for the contributions, and especially Peter there. You provided a really nice sort of background to types of UAS platforms and types of applications and collection. So I do a lot of that kind of work as well, and my work is very much focused on building a community and combining all of these types of satellite-based remote sensing with UAS-based remote sensing and photogrammetry to basically think about how we can harness multispectral information from unmanned aerial systems with vertical measurements that we can also obtain from unmanned aerial systems to basically then try to get at near real-time processes and start making those kinds of measurements similar to what Dr. Battista was showing with the WebGIS. So a lot of my collaborations have been, and my work has been around initially going from the one platform, right, where you could do this, you can sample and you can map and you can come back with the data and you can analyze it and derive all these products. And then you can then upscale that and fuse that to increasingly coarser satellite data. But one interesting thing that we've been able to do is to essentially program multiple UASs to be flown at the same time, basically from one base. And one such project was actually, and is actually currently being funded by the North Carolina Department of Transportation. So it was a unique opportunity to have the capability of doing sort of satellite-based multispectral type of remote sensing, and then bring in that vertical component. So in my lab, for example, I have a variety of fixed wing and quadcopter UAVs. And also, I fly a variety of different sensors, RGB, multispectral, thermal, and more recently, I purchased a LiDAR through that collaboration with the Department of Transportation. And what the Department of Transportation is very interested in here in North Carolina is understanding and essentially mitigating for wetland loss as they create new projects. And I saw a good opportunity there to kind of wrangle together the multiple UAVs and the ability to use cloud computing and Amazon Web Services to essentially pre-program these UASs to fly different paths without ever coming essentially in contact with each other. And then and then going into these areas and collecting a suite of data. So one of the projects that I'm working with them on is how can we fuse multispectral, thermal, and LiDAR data to essentially pinpoint and much more accurately map out, say, where very low topographical areas are that are likely to be wetlands. If you would move on to the next slide, that we can't really necessarily map, right, just from satellite remote sensing, which is what they were relying on to do before. So a lot of the questions that a government agency such as the DOT has to contend with, whether they're building a new road or modifying a bridge or moving dirt around, right? They have to contend with just how much volume is there, what is the vertical morphology of the terrain, but not only the terrain, but also what's on top of that terrain. So I've been doing some really cool data collection with this LiDAR system. It's a Quanergy. It's a relatively inexpensive LiDAR on a mounted on a UAS platform as LiDAR systems go, and it's allowing us to then use machine learning to really pull out the terrain or the pieces that we actually wouldn't be able to pull out from remote sensing otherwise. And I just have a couple more graphics, kind of, if you would want to go on to that, just to show you, and on to the next one. To show you how we can essentially combine, right? So to be able to program, no, you can stay on that. To be able to program multiple UASs, I was working with computer scientists, and then to be able to do the vertical and to be able to get to that near real-time mapping that they would like to sort of see down the line, where you can fly a platform and have that use machine learning and create your vertical structure, identify where you might have a wetland or identify where you might have an invasive species, and use that for very fast decision making is very exciting. And what this kind of work is allowing us then to connect into are some of the airborne, so some of the satellite-borne LiDARs, such as the JEDI or ISAT-2, or the National Ecological Observatory Network that exists in the United States, that also collects a suite of multispectral, hyperspectral, and waveform LiDAR that we can combine and use to essentially develop models and applications that will then help us, again, kind of harness the multi-source piece of remote sensing and geospatial intelligence, the satellite-borne, airborne, drone-borne, into essentially models that can help us answer different pieces. And the other thing I'll say, because you were asking us in the beginning about what is coming, what is hot, and what are some of the limitations. And what I will say is, obviously it's hot for me as a geographer to be able to not only do multispectral remote sensing, which I've done a lot of, but also be able to bring in the 3D, the third dimension, the vertical structure. And I can apply that to questions in savanna environments. Some of the photos you're seeing there on the left are us working in Southern Africa, where woody encroachment, for example, is a huge issue. So now having drones and having the ability to fuse that vertical structure of the vegetation between the drones and some of these satellite-borne LiDARs with the multispectral imagery, it's actually finally allowing us to better map, say, woody encroachments. And so those kinds of things are hot and they're exciting. And what's also very exciting, and I think you kind of get it from these photos, is I get to take students out, and I get to get students excited, and they get hands-on experience. And what I think is really amazing about UAS technology, besides its ability to let us bridge these gaps between the field and the satellites, is the fact that students can go out there. Even if you're just flying an RGB mission, they are flying that mission. They're doing remote sensing. They're coming back, and within an hour, they can have that data processed, and they've generated a remote sensing product. So it's basically like challenging and so on and so forth. But there are, of course, limitations, and a lot of those limitations. And if you want to go over to I had a couple little slides here that were about, so lessons learned, right, between at this interface of being an academic with a research agenda, which revolves around, essentially for me, bringing geography and Geoint together to answer applied questions that sort of need answering in the space of vulnerability and degradation. But as we do so, to incorporate education and to incorporate training and to incorporate education of students, but also training between academia and government agencies, which this DOT project that I'm a part of is showing me that there's a huge need there, right? The DOT is still running these big multi-million-dollar projects on Landsat data, on Landsat multispectral data. So having the ability and the capability to sort of bridge these gaps, and kind of as I say here, a lot of times it's all about seeing these opportunities and moving fast on them and being receptive, but being collaborative, right? Because you have to be able to bring multiple disciplines and multiple types of expertises to the bearing and be responsive and get students involved, get folks in industry involved. And then my next slide was just essentially same kind of thing, but from a slightly different perspective, the technological perspective, this cutting edge, the UAS perspective, right? So there's that upfront investment in technology, and of course a lot of that investment is to kind of get you off the ground, and then you can go into the open geospatial types of processing platforms that Dr. Battista was talking about. But there is going to be some sort of an upfront investment in technology, but it is a risk, right? And if you take that risk and start acquisition and start these kinds of conversations early and build the relationships, you may be able to harness the power of Geoint to answer both research academic questions and to interface with government and very importantly with industry, where a lot of the most rapid technological developments are still taking place. So thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Pricope. And this concludes our panel for today. This has been a great experience, really exciting. I would like just to give you a couple of minutes, maybe last, to present your concluding remarks before we turn on into the questions, additional questions potentially from the audience. Anyone? Dr. Molina, would you like to start?
Yeah, thank you, Camille. I'm going to be very brief. I think the evolution of technology and the rapidity of it is amazing. But in order to succeed, you need to master the fundamentals. You need to have a basic understanding of remote sensing. The technologies will change, but the physics doesn't. You need to have an understanding of spatial technology and how you can apply imagery and interpretations and whatever else, magnetics, into a common platform environment or a common display environment. So understanding the fundamentals of GIS is critical, and understanding the different opportunities that are there for incorporating new technologies is important. So basic math, basic earth sciences, remote sensing, and then you can bring in cooperators, and we've heard about all sorts of cooperation opportunities in order to provide additional directions and sources of information. But I think it's critical to start out being grounded and well positioned.
Thank you, Dr. Molina. Dr. Battista?
Yeah, I really support what everybody's doing here. I completely agree. So just a closing note, I think, is my personal opinion, that the relevance of Geoint as a field is really to recognize that Geointers are more coordinators. Sometimes we have to wear many hats, and I think even if the hat doesn't fit properly, that's the difference, because it closes not just a knowledge gap across industries, but also we have to recognize that there's a lag time still between when we acquire really, really good information that has the potential to change our direction in policies and in ethics and other things. There's still a lag time to putting that into action. And so that's what the field of geospatial intelligence stands to accelerate, is the time that it takes to get these products from the field and to get them into use and to get them into policy and so forth. And so that's the emerging field the way I see it, and that exists all across the board. Academia is really struggling to provide the resources so that people can come into the workforce with this. Industries recognize the knowledge gap. There's so much technology that we're actually at a point where we can become dangerous with it. Artificial intelligence is a great example. There are rules to using these things. You know, you can do it, but if you do it improperly, you can create more harm than good. And that's where the government comes in to ensure that how we use this information needs to be proper. So thank you.
Thank you. And Dr. Carlson?
I agree with Dr. Battista, and that is that Geoint has really started to come of age. And I think selfishly, for those that are going to be going to the field, and especially in the disciplines that I end up seeing, having those applications put in their hands, a better awareness as to how those applications can help them either mitigate activities that are on the horizon or make better planning for the future are going to be critical, especially as technology continues to make the leaps and bounds that it has been within these fields. So again, I thank the presentations and the fellow presenters that were here today, because this is going to be of value to, I know, what our students are basically going out in the field to do every day.
Thank you. Dr. Pricope, my apologies for misspelling your first name.
Oh, it's okay. You get all sorts of ways. Yeah, so I would say I definitely agree with what's been said before me. And the only thing I'd like to add is that as we've seen and as everybody's made quite clear, the Geoint field is very powerful, and we can use it to do great good, and we can definitely make sure we steer it away from doing harm. But one thing I would say is that as geospatial, as Geointers, we have the great power of essentially thinking about questions and thinking about the impact of the kinds of work we do on more sensitive communities, on more sensitive issues, and that's definitely a challenge that I think we should consider as technology continues to develop at a rapid pace, right? The ethics of what it is that we do and how we do it.
Thank you. And finally, Dr. Webley.
Thanks. I think I'll try and tie together everyone's comments. I definitely support the Dr. Molina's comments on the training and having a base, having a good grounding in the data that you're going to be looking at, because often then you can understand where the product is that you're using comes from for the intelligence derived from that data, and that comes down to the ethics, it comes down to how the data is used. You might have approved product generators versus non-approved coming into an event, and sort of the reliability of which you use those data sets in your decision making. But then there's also adding in, I wouldn't call it uncertainty, but so I guess the quality of the product, the quality of the intelligence, rather than just saying an absolute. So as you develop a derived product, be it from spaceborne imagery, be it from ground-based data, ground-based observations, you're going to need to understand the data quality, the data precision, to add that into your tools or into your decision-making process, because you want confirmation of your event that's happening. So often it may be one or two sources that come in that can confirm the first source rather than just relying on the one data source. So it's how all of this is coming together is the base understanding. If you get a product, find out potentially where it's come from, what was used to derive it. If you don't have the understanding, find somebody maybe who's more of a specialist in that area, which what we tried to do with Dr. Carlson is bringing in some of the experts in the remote sensing at the university to work with the students going through the Homeland Security program. And the same would be on the sort of AI computer machine learning type of approach. So it's an integrated approach such that those making that final decision from the intelligence have the most information about where it came from, so they can make the best decision and most informed decision during a crisis event, if it is a crisis event, or a long-term tracking event, so they can be making something that is supportive of whatever their mission or whatever their need is moving forwards.
Great conclusion. I couldn't have done better. So again, I would like to conclude by thanking all of our panelists for providing great insight, as well as Dr. Tuluca and the Romanian Society of Applied Geophysics for their invitation to participate. Thank you, everyone. Bye-bye, and see you next time, hopefully.
Thank you. It's been a pleasure.